All right, everybody, I want to do a quick video about finding evidence or finding sources and where you would find academically appropriate sources. If we were in class, I would have done this as a field trip to the library, but unfortunately we're not there. Hopefully you've been to Joiner Library. It's an incredible resource. If you haven't been on campus yet, I can't urge you strongly enough to go and visit the library. Their book resources are incredible. Their online resources are just as good, and there are tons of librarians who are there all the time ready to help and who want to help you to find what you need to get the information that you need to be successful in your classes. So please go visit the library. It's also where the Writing Center is, and I can't urge strongly enough to go there. All right, so when we talk about sources, what I wanted to talk about was kind of the main difference between the kind of two main categories of sources that you might use for academic writing. And those really are kind of, as I see it, are broken down into popular sources, which can oftentimes be very useful and appropriate for your writing, but also those that are more academically appropriate. So we're thinking about books, probably more academically themed books. And probably the most important for you is academic journals. And I'm going to show you a little bit about here. And I'm going to actually probably do a separate video to talk about finding academically appropriate sources, particularly journals, because journal articles are going to be very important for you. And then I do want to talk a little bit about the in-between, where there's kind of a brackish water of sources. And then a little bit about media bias a little bit too, because I think that's important. All right, so when we think about popular sources, these are going to be the kind of the everyday, the sources of information and news that come to us in our day-to-day activities. So the benefits of them, of course, timely, they're easy to read, usually written at a much lower reading level than the academic sources that you're going to have. And what that does is that makes them more relevant to a wider audience and generally a little bit more accessible and a little more popular, I guess is maybe the right word for it. I mean, I guess we just keep saying popular, but accessible and of use to more people. Of course, some of the drawbacks, you're going to find that there's because of the lack of reading level or the academic integrity of some of these sources, you're not going to get as much information, or at least not as much detailed information out of popular sources as you would academic sources, of course. And they also have the lack of peer review. Now, I will say that when we think about peer review, what we're thinking about is a very specific process within academic writing. That means that you write something as an academic piece of work, and you send it out, and you have other people who are in your career field who will review it and look at it and say, yes, this makes sense. This kind of follows along with the majority of people in our career field understand and to be the truth about our career field and what seems appropriate for what we do here. Let's get back to the popular sources, though. I don't want to suggest that there isn't overview of some of these popular news sources or information sources. If we look at here, Sports Illustrated, USA Today, even Fox News, People Magazine. I'm not 100% sure about that, but certainly your big newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, probably out of London, BBC for sure, NPR. These are some news sources that I know firsthand have incredible editorial control of what's going into their pages and what's going on at their screens. So, there are editors for these. I don't want anybody to get the suggestion that they're just kind of out there, like a blog, somebody's blog shooting off from the hip. Most of these, the more accepted mainstream news sources are going to be highly edited and are going to have some aspect of control over or editorial oversight over what's going into their pages. All right, so these popular sources can be useful to you, and I don't want you to be feel that you can't use them, or that these should be the only ones that you do use. I definitely don't want you to use these solely in your academic writing, but they are certainly better than what I see most first-year writers use, which is geniuslyrics.com or something, which is absolutely the least appropriate website. But we're baby steps. All right, so let's think about some academically appropriate sources. So these are going to generally be, we're talking about books that are academically written books, highly specific about certain bits of information, and then also journal articles. So journals, you got to think about, we're kind of entering a new phase with digital media, to where it may be hard for you to understand the idea of a magazine, and I don't, I'm not being snarky at all about that. I'm just saying that these are kind of gradually finding their way out of popular culture. So if you go to Barnes and Noble or any of the bookstores or something, you're going to find a bunch of magazine racks, but you're generally not going to find a lot of academic writing. And what they are is there's an organization within basically every branch, every sub-branch, every highly specialized group of academics who this organization will put together a magazine. It could be yearly, it could be annually, it could be quarterly. Could be every 6 months, about that are with this journal is going to be full of articles written by scholarly articles that are peer reviewed by members of the that group of academics who are kind of subscribed to this higher. Generally, it's a very specific and narrow collection of ideas. So if we look at this one example here, I have. This is the African Journal of Herpetology. So, if you think about the specificity required for writing, academic writing, highly researched and studied writing about snakes in Africa. I mean, that's a very, very specific thing. However, this journal is going to come out and it's going to be full of articles about African snakes, and it's not necessarily something I would pick up, but for some people it is very important. If you're a herpetologist, if you're in the animal biology, whatever, if that's what you studied, then this might be of value to you. We have some other ones here. There's a book here, Social Anthropology and Human Origins. This is a book written by an academic that was there, and all this stuff now is starting to come on websites, and so this is why it might be hard to understand when we start to talk about volume number and volume and edition numbers and all these other things, because it used to be that these would actually come out in paper. They would be mailed to you, mailed to whatever the department, whatever study department would be at a university, and you would get them, and you would actually have to use a piece of paper. Actually, if you go to Joiner Library now at ECU, it's very hard to find print editions. It's almost all digital now. So some of the terminology and some of the way that we talk about journals is going to be a bit anachronistic to you, because it just the information doesn't get to you in the same way. All right, so let's think a little bit about why these are appropriate sources for you, probably the most appropriate sources. First off, they're peer reviewed, and what that means is, like I said, is that if I'm a African snake expert and I'm writing an article about a study that I've done on a snake in Africa, and I want to submit it to the African Journal of Herpetology, I'm going to send that to the journal. The journal's going to send that out to other African snake experts, and they're going to look at it and review it, and to make sure that it seems right, that it's appropriate, that the findings are probably generally in keeping with what most snake experts understand. And if there's some wild claims in there, they'll do a little bit more research. So that's what peer review is, to make sure that you're not just coming out of left field with some wild information. It's actually being vetted to some degree by experts in the field. Other benefit is that the authors are legitimate experts in the field too, right? So this is coming from people who have spent their entire life studying an incredibly specific piece of information about like African snakes, right? That's kind of weird. People within academic circles that this information is going to be shared in are going to respect it and understand that this is respectable and citable and important information for your career field. Some of the drawbacks, of course, the peer review process takes forever, and I mean like years sometimes, so it can be less timely. And then sometimes the language can be very, very overly complicated. That's one of the things I'm a critic of is how overly complicated academic writing is. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth the complexity of the language. All right, so we do have also some news sources that kind of fall somewhere in between the academic and the popular. This generally is where we're going to find popular sources that are a little bit more rigorous about the way that they present information. New York Times is generally probably regarded as one of the better news sources in the world. Frontline puts on really great documentaries on PBS. NPR, I know a lot of people slag NPR for being, a bunch of liberals, but at the end of the day, NPR is really fairly right down the line, and they're not overly partisan. Really good information. Sometimes they spend a lot of time doing their research. And one of the monthly magazines that I really respect is The Atlantic. They've always been really good. All right, so let's think a little bit about online sources. Is it ever permissible to use online social media stuff for your academic work? Maybe. I'm not going to say no. Wikipedia, there is a way that you can use Wikipedia. You're not going to cite Wikipedia ever. If I see you citing Wikipedia, I'm going to lose my mind. But the thing about Wikipedia is that if you go down to the bottom of the page on all these pages, they always cite their sources. And so what's cool about that, what I do like about Wikipedia is that you can use that as a jumping off point to go find other information. Sometimes it's academically appropriate sources, comes from really highly respected news outlets. So Wikipedia is a resource, but it's not a source that you can use for actually citing information. The reason there, of course, is that we don't know, the anonymity of Wikipedia means that we don't know who is editing the information or who's changing it, and it changes on a second by second basis sometimes. So Wikipedia is a good, like I said, it's a good resource, but it's not an acceptable source to cite. All right, what about Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, those kinds of things? They can be an appropriate source if that's a firsthand account from somebody who is putting up a video about a protest somewhere. You can say in this video from whatever. If you look at your Little Seagull manual or any of the other citation manuals, you'll find that they'll show you ways to cite all the social media stuff. Pinterest, I don't know why you would cite Pinterest, but if you want to, I don't know. I wouldn't. Something like songmeanings.com, that's just individual people's opinions, things like that, or these opinion kind of places. Generally not going to be acceptable. All right, so let's look at this. They've got this chart that I want to show you is put together by a media organization that kind of they chart the way that the right and the left leaning, and whether or not something is more trustworthy or not trustworthy. And what you'll see is the repeat offenders, the ones that we know are probably not going to be the most reliable, are going to be down towards the bottom of this chart. The more reliable sources are going to be towards the top: Associated Press, Washington Post, New York Times, blah 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 blah. NPR usually will find itself up there. And then they also have this on the left and right. So, left, of course, meaning, much more kind of a liberal progressive bias, or right is that more conservative. So if you think TV wise, you'll think, MSNBC is on the left and Fox News is on the right, but it gets much more extreme to the left and the right than both of those. All of these can be used as sources. I wouldn't suggest that they all need to be. Some of them I definitely wouldn't out of hand. But if you're looking at this chart and you're saying, well, is this a reliable source? I would say the closer to the top and the closer to the middle that you get, these are probably going to be a much better source that you're going to use. So what I hope you take from this is that there are much more academically appropriate sources, scholarly journals, books written by scholars and members of the academy. Some news sources can be really good resources. Things I don't want you to lean on are Wikipedia and just somebody's blog, or words, songlyrics.com or something like that. Those aren't generally going to be academically appropriate sources. If you guys have any questions about this, you know where to get a hold of me. Thanks.